Hey guys, Jay here, welcome to Eons of Battle, and if there's one thing I love, it's showing you guys how to paint stuff. But I think it's about time we get back to the basics, so let me show you how to take an average paint job and turn it into a masterpiece. It's a big step in a new painter's career when they can say that they paint within the lines of a model. What this means is that, like a coloring book page, painting inside those lines is what separates your little nephew's drawings from 24-year-old you's drawings. Go on, show that little punk who's boss. But this is hard to do on a model, especially when you're an inexperienced painter. It is a constant battle to get paint where you want it. The bristles of the brush always seem to have a mind of their own. But through trial and lots of error, you'll eventually get the hang of it. And it's great when you finally have mastered painting within the lines. It means that no matter the mini, you can paint it. Boots, brown. Armor, red. Skin, brown. And maybe a little bit of cheat juice at the end for good measure. With this skill under your belt, you can put minis on the table that anyone would be proud of. But what separates an average paint job from an extraordinary one? Why do some people's models look different? Well, because they have mastered painting within the lines, and so have advanced into putting paint outside the lines. A lot of things fall into this category: highlighting, shading, freehanding, contrast. It's all involved in taking the next step to paradoxically put paint outside the lines again. And so it's time to paint! For this project, I'm going to limit myself to painting only inside the lines, simplifying my painting process, and hopefully it'll save me some time too. Here I have this Necromunda Ganger from House Goliath. This should do really well painting up to tabletop standard. On this model, I'm going to paint each part of the mini one solid color, and then at the end, a wash. The first thing I did was I primed the model black. Black primer is always a safe choice when priming, because it's easy to leave those hard to reach areas black. They would be in shadow anyway. It doesn't look quite right when those areas are bright white. The first thing I did was I picked out all of his armor with red paint. I did his chest piece, the boots, wrist armor, mohawk, and the handle wrap on his little hammer. After the red, I painted gray with some P3 Iron Hull Gray. This is a lovely gray that thins very well and still gives good coverage. I painted this on the cloth he's wearing under his arm armor and all over his pants. After the pants were sufficiently gray, I went back in with red and picked out the red piping on his pants. And I almost forgot, but I also painted his codpiece, or dick shroud, red too. I'm glad I chose to paint the red after gray. It's a lot better to paint the red on the gray than try to keep the gray off of the red. Next, it was time to give him some skin. For this, I used Vallejo Beige Red from their model color range. And holy moly ravioli, this took some time. The beige red has decent coverage, but it still took forever to build it up over black. But eventually, I got the job done. After that, it was time for the metal, and boy was this a breath of fresh air after the beige. I really like Games Workshop Lead Belcher. One coat and done on all of the metal areas of the model, like his hammer, belt, armor, mohawk, spikes, and arm pipes. And I can't forget about his gun either. Then, last but not least, some Vallejo Chocolate Brown on all his straps for his wrist armor and shin armor. I also used this for the bandage on his hand. I'm sure whatever brown fabric that is, it's clean and dry. And lastest, just a drop of Games Workshop Lothorn Blue for the plasma gun energy. Now the model is completely base coated, and it's time to add some washes. I cannot recommend enough to use Army Painter washes. They are great, and very cheap compared to Games Workshop. Buying the whole set of Army Painter washes is the same price as buying 4 Games Workshop washes. Over all the skin, I applied some Army Painter Flesh Wash. Army Painter Wash is a little thinner than Games Workshop, so in some areas you might need a second coat. After the flesh, I applied some Army Painter Red Tone all over the red areas. This red is very bright, so it takes 2 coats to really darken these areas up. And then finally, I applied some Army Painter Dark Tone all over the metal parts of the model. His weapons, tubes, shoes, and pants. With the washes dry, the model is done. And now that the model is finished, it looks good. Games Workshop kits really lend themselves to getting you to this quality of finished model. Games Workshop sculpts their models in such a way that it gives us the optimal chance of success, making weapons oversized, the details are easier to paint, and making things like armor and straps proud. They stick out a little further than they should to make it easier for the paint bristles to find them. So we have our model painted, varnished, and ready for tabletop. But we can take it further. We can push the paint job from fine to fantabulastic. But it's going to take some explanation, so hold on to your butts. I think the easiest way to explain what I'm talking about is on Photoshop. So here's a Space Marine painted in the same style of my Ganger. Everything has a color and some basic contrast from the wash paints. All the paint is clean and within the lines of the model. But to really push our paint job to the max, we have to paint outside the lines. This is one of the hardest things to wrap your head around. You have to put paint where it feels like there shouldn't be paint. Until this point, you can just follow the model or follow the box, but from here on out, you have to make it up. Where would the light be falling on the model? What part of the model would be in shadow? What's a highlight and where should it go? Well, the good news is that you don't have to pull everything out of thin air. To help understand what we need to paint, we need a reference. And just like the model and box art helped us with the basics, the photographs of real light hitting the model will help us with the advanced work. As you improve and get more reps under your belt, you'll start to just intuit these things, but early on, it's nice to have a reference. Even when you're really good, it's smart to have a reference. Before you even get a model out of its box, it's probably not a bad idea to look at what other people have done with it. Search up the Mini on things like YouTube, Google Images, Pinterest, Instagram, or Cool Mini or Not. Absorb and get inspired so that you can start to formulate a plan. But when it comes to reference you use while painting, I would suggest a non-Mini resource. And the best reference is going to be the Mini. So first, I like to photograph the bare model under decent overhead lighting. For this, I'm using my 2 painting lamps, and I'm throwing a black t-shirt underneath to help absorb the light so that I don't get a lot of bounce light reflecting off my table. I'm not really taking a photo of the model, but more the light hitting the model. Perfect! No masterpiece of a photo, but this will give me some great pointers on where to put my paint. I can already see the brightest spots are the tops of his arms, his weapons, the front of his chest, and a nice round spot on his leg. These are the spots that should almost be white in my paint job. And the shadows are his shins, the underside of his chest armor, and the bottom of his gun. After that, I wanted something a bit more extreme. So for this photo, I turned off my lights, and I blasted my Mini from above with a flashlight, and photographed that as well. Bam! This is going to give me a really exaggerated lighting condition. This will be super helpful as well, and the highlights I paint onto the Mini will probably be somewhere in between this photo and the last. In this photo, I can see a lot of my highlights even more clearly, like this line of white on his knee armor, the top of his mohawk, and the front of his left boot. And the shadows are very dramatic. Everything that is not lit up is just black. And for most Minis, you could stop right here, but this guy has a fancy glowing plasma gun, so why not get some reference on that as well? For this shot, I found a blue LED and held it up to the model so that it was sitting right where the gun would be giving off light. And once I was happy with it, I snapped another photo. That's a unique photo, but I don't know if I'll be doing OSL like this on the model. Looking closer at the gun, it looks like the shape would block most of the light from hitting the body of the figure. But I'm glad I know that now before I have put some blue all over the Mini. This would totally work if he was casting a spell or carrying a lantern, but the gun just doesn't look like it would throw that kind of light on the model. Now to finish up on references, a zenithal prime would not hurt either. A zenithal highlight is a step taken after you prime a very dark color, usually black, where you spray a very light color, usually white, from top down to give an effect analogous to light from directly above hitting the model. This is a great start, but it's not a perfect replacement for photographs because it's paint and not light, and it won't give you the same bounce and reflection as real light. So it's nice to have the photos too. And it's finally time to get back to painting. Time to rehydrate the palette, break out the brushes, and paint all over again. And this time I'm armed with my painted model, my reference, and my favorite show to paint to. It's time to take this model to the next level. I started by adding black paint to my red paint, Vallejo Bloody Red. I mixed it 50-50 with black and thinned it down. And I started applying this mixture to the undersides of the red armor. This paint is thin enough that it's not painting lines, but more tinting down the colors. I went over these spots again and again until I thought they looked noticeably darker. Then I watered down some black paint and did the same thing to the pants, painting the undersides to create the look of shadows. I wanted to keep in mind my reference and the spots of light I discovered, so I kept this watered down black out of those areas. To brighten up the red paint, I went back in with the base color Bloody Red. Any areas I didn't add dark is getting some more red. I painted this on all the edges of the red armor. This is brighter than what's on the model because of the red wash I used, but it's still not perfect. Then I highlighted the pants with some watered down P3 paints, and I made sure that the brightest spot was on his left knee because of what I saw from my reference photos. I also picked out his butt cheeks and the folds of his pants. Now getting back to the red armor, it's not light enough, But red is kind of a unique color because you can't just add white to it to make it lighter, because it becomes pink. And my tough as nails ganger doesn't want pink armor, so to brighten up the red, I'm going to be highlighting with orange. So I watered down some orange, specifically P3 Kador Red Highlight, and applied it sparingly, following along with the highest points of light on my reference material. I did a lot of edge highlighting, and I thinned it down a lot to apply over larger areas like the tops of his arm armor and chest armor. On the brightest spots of the red, I mixed around 50-50 white paint and orange, and just stippled this onto some spots, applying it to the tip of the mohawk, the tip of the chest armor, and basically just the tip of all of the red. Next was the skin, which was pretty straightforward. Mixed my color, Vallejo Beige Red, with white 50-50 and then watered it down. Then I began applying it to all the tops of his many muscles. According to my reference, the brightest spots are his shoulders and his right bicep, so I gave those spots the most coats of this color to bring it up to an almost pure white. I didn't paint any of this on his underarms because I wanted those areas to stay dark. Next, I broke out some Rune Fang Steel, a Games Workshop silver color, and started to put this on the top areas of the metal. I particularly focused on the face and top of the hammer. In my photos, these areas are almost white. I also brushed this on the top of his pistol, the blades of his mohawk, and all of the tubes and pipes running into his back. Essentially, you want the darkest dark to be black, and the brightest bright to be white. The difference is going to be what gives the model contrast. After that, I mixed my Rune Fang Steel with white paint 50-50 and applied this to the model as well. I used this for the brightest spots of metal. Next, it was time to brighten the brown, so I used some Vallejo Earth and applied it mostly to the straps over his shoulders to brighten them almost to match the brightness of his skin. Now the model is basically done, the only thing left is the plasma. Now the blue we used before, Lawthorn Blue, is a light blue, so to add more contrast, I'm going to darken it with some Vallejo Magic Blue. I applied this to the sides of the plasma, and I let it fall into the metal body in closest shapes to make it appear glowing. I went back in with Lawthorn Blue and cleaned up my lines, and then I painted a few passes of very watered down white, because cast light is always going to be dimmer than the source. This white is going to make the magic blue look more realistic. And lastly, I looked at the skin and felt that it was all too bright, so I applied some Army Painter Soft Tone, which is a brown wash, to the underside of his skin to darken it up. I also used this to accentuate some of the muscles in his arms and around his head. And just many hours later, the model was finished. And speaking of finished models, the reason we get so much painted is because of our wonderful patrons over on Patreon. Not only do they help us support the channel, but they get access to exclusive live streams, they see our schedule ahead of time, and all the inside jokes they can handle. So let's get back to the mini. Alright, now that my mini has been painted twice, it's time to see the results. We can put it up against the first pass and see how they compare. I'd say the differences are pretty striking. The first pass was fine, but the second try really gives the mini a lot of interesting things to look at. The second try is much more painterly. The first model is not very different between the lightest lights and the darkest darks. It looks decent on the tabletop, but the second mini, you can really get your eye in there and see those details. It takes a little more time, but I think it's definitely worth it. It adds a lot of value to the model. As your painting quality increases, it'll enhance the enjoyment you get out of your models. It can really sting to spend $40 on a small model for your army. But if you become a good painter, it can help a lot. This model may be expensive, but it's going to take 20 hours to paint, and then you'll have a gorgeous model to admire for 20 more hours. It's like a summer beach pass. Every time you visit the beach, the price of the summer pass goes down. Each hour you spend painting is one more hour of entertainment that you got out of that mini. So get yourself some reference photos and maybe take another crack at some of your minis. I'm sure you can do a better job now. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope I've helped you along in your miniature painting career. And as always, thanks for watching.